Hello, so today I'm going to walk you through how you're going to replicate score. I made this interesting little mini game to show off how you would in a game replicate the score. This technique, I suppose you could call it, you could transfer it into a scoreboard like in Call of Duty where there's the amount of kills and showing the amount of points in a game or something like that. But this game is literally just you're going around and you're interacting with these cubes here, which give you speed and give you points. But as you can see, they both think they're player one, and they're both not. So the score is not being replicated across screens. Now this is a problem because you're going to want the players to be able to see the same score, and yeah, so it feels like you're playing the same game, and then it's a bit competitive then. So I go blueprints, blueprint class, and then type game state base, BP underscore, just name it whatever you want. I'm going to call mine game state. Drag this over here. So what's unique about the game state is any variable in here automatically replicates. So you just have to call to update the variables in here. So if I make player 1 score and player 2 score, now we have both the variables, so now we can do custom update player 1 score, custom update player 2 score, and all that we'll be doing is this, setting the value for now. Okay, we get this in place, so where this would be is wherever you're adding the score, most likely wherever you're like increasing the score. For me, that's my player when he runs into a cube. So if I go to the third person, because I'm doing this in a third person template, so whenever you want to increase the score, this is going to be most likely done from the player. Say you kill a player, or you, in my case, hit a cube, it's going to come over here and it's going to add a point. So now we're going to want to communicate the score. So it's probably better if I name this score. So this is this player's score. And when I add a point, so here, I'm going to increment this. And then I'm going to get the game state. And I'm just going to cast to the game state. Game state. Like so. And I'm going to update player 1 score by this value. Okay, so here you may be thinking, so how am I going to update player 2 score? So that is a good question.
This is me from the future. So I deleted the function in game state and now I'm creating another one.
We're going to get the player to pass a score. We're going to call it player score. And also their ID. So you may be thinking, the ID? What do you mean by ID? We didn't talk about no ID yet. So we're going to go into the game mode, and whilst we're in the game mode, we might as well set the default game state class. And on login, on post login, we're gonna make sure it's valid. Well, it will be valid at this point, but you could get it, make sure it is valid just to be on the safe side. We're not going to do that here. Cast to third person character. ID index. So we're going to make a variable called ID index, which is an integer value. And we're going to need to have an ID on each character. set ID, and the ID index is gonna be useful here, and then we're gonna increment this value every time someone joins. Okay, so you can see how this is going to work out. So yeah, so event post login, as it says here, it's a notification that a player has successfully logged in and has been given a player controller. So this is when they have fully connected to the server or the game. Okay. So now, when you're updating the score, it's probably better to do it like this. Get the score, plug it in there. So I'm in the player and I've just set the score, cast into the game state, and I'm saying update this player's score. Now with the ID, we're gonna need to do something in the game mode. So every time someone joins, we're gonna also add them to an array. So we can just call this players. We can now make this an array by clicking this little capsule, which goes from single to array. We type add and add these players to this array. Okay. And we're gonna need to make another players array. Make sure you set it as the same type. So that would be for me, third person character. Make sure it's an array. Custom, make a new custom event. So you just type, to get that to happen, you literally just type custom update players. This is because I'm fairly certain, may need to double check this, that the game state cannot communicate to the game mode, but the game mode can communicate to the game state. So for now, I'm just gonna do this. Get game state, cast to game state, BP game state. This is our game state, and update players. So this is just updating the array. Now, this could be a bit of an issue if the amount of players was large, but for a game of 2 to 4 players, this is not going to be an issue. And the way you could improve this from being, even with this current setup, is just make sure that this isn't the type that you have. So this isn't a BP third person character type. This would just be a pawn, for example, because the pawn base class doesn't have any variables in it aside from the ones that's the base variables. The third person character, my third person character, could have a million different references and pointers to other classes if it was a poorly made class, character actor, but still it's more efficient to have this variable type be a pawn rather than the character, rather than my character type. So every time I update a player's score, I'm gonna get So I'll do. So really, this implementation would work better for more than 2 players here. And if I had a scoreboard. So if I wanted to update so I would get HUD cache update player scores. And I think here I would probably change this up because we're doing it by ID. So if I was to get ID here, if I was to just ask for ID and score, I could then switch based on ID. Now this is probably not the best way to do it. But this will work. So what's happening? We go through the flow of execution here. Go to update the player score. Now you pass in the correct variables. I'm gonna swap these around by getting these little dots here and dragging it below, just so it's a bit neater. I could also do this to make it a bit neater. Neatness is always welcome in blueprints because it can become an ugly mess very quickly. And when other people look at your code, it will be their thank you for it being a lot tidier than it can get. So here, just adding that variable to make it a little bit more tidy. So this is actually setting the text variables. So these in here are just variables. As I said, these could easily be rows in a scoreboard. Which, if you wanted me to show you how you would do that, I can make that in a separate video. So here, yeah. So if I come to the player again, I'm updating my score. I'm passing in the player score and ID. And this is setting the text based on the ID and the score. So let's see if this works. I think this could work here. So it's going through every player, and based on the ID is setting the score. Okay. Let's see if this works. Okay, it's not worked for any player. How peculiar. So let's check out why. How would I check out why? Well, I would actually just add a breakpoint here, and add a breakpoint here, and add a breakpoint here. So you can see at every stage what is happening. Wait for a block, come into the block. Okay, so let's make this bigger. Let's make sure I don't end the recording here. But you press F10 to go for a breakpoint. Okay. Some reason it seems that. Okay, so actually. Okay, it says that the HUD is invalid. How strange. The HUD is definitely on the screen. Okay, so here, so I had to move the breakpoint from there to here. So it's increasing the score, so the score is now 1, you can see. It's setting the score here, so it's definitely right. Yes, 1 and my ID is 0. That's what I'd expect. Now this player's num, so players is 0. That's not good. So the issue is passing. Apparently nothing will be returned from this. The only thing I can do here is pass in each individual player. Or scratch that and just get every time I want to. This isn't the best way of doing it, but we can test to see if I can get the players from the game mode. So, no, I mean I can test to see if the game state can communicate with the game mode to retrieve data, like the players variable, which that's not what I wanted. Get players, pass it in here for each. Okay, so let's see now. So we know we're getting the right data being passed here. So we just need to make sure. Okay, so I'm getting an error here. Yeah, so that's not needed anymore. Can remove that. Let me press play again. Wait for a cube. Bam. Okay, so player score coming in at 0 apparently. That is an issue. Let me see if I can get, says players 0, 2. Okay, that's not good. So definitely cannot retrieve data from players because, as I said, yeah, the game state cannot communicate with the game mode. So the main way I would do this then is I would have add player. Add. This adds a player for us to use. New player, get control pawn, add, yes. Set ID. Yep. And get game state. Cast to BP game state. Add player. Like so. Now let me make sure this is being called by adding a breakpoint here. Okay, this is not being called. Why not? So I've changed the player's variable to a pawn. So now when I add a player, I don't have to cast like this. We can actually just remove that from here. So the way that I'm going to do this is I'm going to have to use an interface. Blueprint, interface, not here. Under blueprints, here's an interface. So I'm going to call it BPI player. Set ID. Preference it with an I for interface and make a new function ID, but for setting the ID. Come into class settings and type in here under inherited interfaces BPI player, and double clicking it allows you to bring up this event where I'm going to be able to set the ID. Ooh. So in game mode, we're now just calling I set ID. we can get rid of this here, add this in. So when we set the ID, we're also increasing the ID here. And after we've done this, we can add a sequence to make this a bit more tidy. And just update, add a player here, and see if this works. This should work. Okay, yeah, so this is definitely adding a player here. Yeah, it's adding a player here. So this is definitely working now. I could tell because the breakpoint there was very helpful. So now I'm gonna change this up and do a for each. So now we're gonna have to change this update player scores into a interface call. So ID score. Wait, is that the right? No, I'm doing score ID. So this is the other way around. Here, and then we double click this to bring this up. And now so we actually don't need that there. We can just remove that and put this down here. Type in update player scores, which this can be changed to score. Makes sense to change it to score because you're updating one score at a time. I can leave this here. Oh, actually, yeah, I can remove that for now. Make sure there's another breakpoints. So this is now updating the score. So if I go back to here, so this is doing a for each of each pawn, and then I'm going to do I update score. So I can remove this portion that's irrelevant now, and there we go. So now if there's anybody listening who implements, no, not anybody listen, I mean if any of these pawns implement this interface event, then it will be called. So now I'm gonna wait for a cube. Okay, and it still didn't work. Why is that? Investigate again. Can follow the chain of events here. And we have to go back to the player here. And into here. So there's going to be quite a few breakpoints, but this is how you debug a broken solution. There we go. So F10, F10. Can check the score value is 1. We casted the game state. So we have a valid game state. A score and our ID is 0. So score, passing in score. Score is coming in as 1. As 0. So this is, oh no, score is coming in as 1. Okay. So the debugging is not very helpful now. So I'm going to remove all the debug breakpoints. I'm going to leave this one actually. Okay, so it's definitely not calling the widget. the widget is not being called. So is this being called? So the interface is not being called. Interesting, because we have the interface here. So game state. These are the pawns. So let's see if this is being called by a print string and see. I can actually do a more useful print string here. So here's where I'd start using print strings, because it's not very clear what is actually happening, and breakpoints are no longer being useful. And they're becoming a bit tedious. So this is the display name of the pawn. Then I can type in score and pass in the score value. Then I could type in ID and pass in the ID value, creating a more useful print string there. The score is 1, the ID is 0. Score is 1, ID is 0, score is 3, I mean. So, what is happening there then? So, I've changed up what I was doing here after a bit of experimentation. Still not working correctly yet, but I've changed it so instead of adding a pawn, it's adding a player controller, and now it actually shows when I start playing that it's adding these player controllers to the array. With pawns it wasn't working, and I'm not too sure why. So I'm adding these PCs into a player controllers array here, and then when I'm updating the scores, I'm getting the player controllers and doing a for each loop, getting the control pawn, and then calling an interface on that. Now, there is one issue here. It's still not updating it for both players. And I have a theory why. So if I run into this, it's updating for the player on the left, but not the player on the right. And now this is actually not what we don't want. So even if I play as this player, it is saying here that the score is not replicating, nor is the ID. So how do we get that to replicate? So we go into the player, we click ID, and we make sure this is set to replicated. Now we see what happens now. So I'm hoping that now when I step into this cube, it is going to say ID 2 or ID 1. No, that's not happened. So why is that? Let me go into the game mode. Here it's setting the ID. So let me go to where the ID is getting set here and do a print string. You're going to notice there's a recurring theme that I'm going to do when I'm debugging. So ID set. Okay, so it's not calling that either. Get control pawn off game mode doesn't seem to work, because I'm sending the message and the target does implement this, but it's not working. So how do we fix this? Well, I'm gonna bet that if I do it in game state, it's gonna work. So let me try that. Create ID index, add it on to this function here. Get controlled form. And make sure that's the target of the interface call. So now, okay, still not being called. Wait. Why would it not be called? So player. This is definitely set up. Add PC. PC is added. Call set ID. So this must not be set up properly yet. So what I'm going to do is, maybe this is a little bit hacky. But it should work. So I'm going to make a custom function here. And set timer, set ID timer. So I'm going to set a timer by event. Gonna custom event here. ID set, ID tick. We're gonna give it a time to buffer, and you'll see what I mean in a second. So ID timer handle. So every time this is called, it's going to set a new timer. But if you call this function again, it's going to override the existing timer because it's setting the exact same timer ID handle here. So the theory is, if I call this every time a player joins, it's going to call this timer. And it won't finish the execution, the tick here, unless there's been 2 seconds between each player joining. So it doesn't spam call this, setting all the IDs every time a player joins. There'll be a delay. You could probably set this to like 1, maybe. But this is to reduce calls. So for each player, get control PORM, I set ID, yeah. And the ID is going to be the index of the for each loop. And every time we come to do this, we're going to have to reset the ID index. Okay. So now let's give this a shot. Okay, so you can see there, the player 2 took longer than a second to join, but then it reset to 0, and then set player 1 and player 2's ID. So now if I run into this, it's still not working here. But it is saying, oh actually, so you can see for the server, it is replicating. So I walk into here and the server is working correctly. So now it's just a client that we need to make work. But you can see the ID value for the client is set correctly. So why would the client not replicate? Let's take a look at that. Now my first bet would be this score value needs to be replicated. That's still not worked. Now, I think I have a sneaky suspicion why this isn't working. So if I come back up into my view here so you can see the client, the issue I think is that when I walk into this cube, it's saying the server is saying that this score is being set to 1. So if I look at the score here, it's only happening for the server. Why would that be? So this score here is happening server side because it's coming from the game state. So if I come into here, my suspicion is that I've got to set this to a client RPC. So before I name it, well, I could actually just name it update player score, pass in the correct variables by doing this, just dragging it on. I can even just grab this is valid here. Make sure the score and everything's lined up, and make sure it's set to run on owning client. See update player score. As you can see, that's now working. So player 2 score is updating on both screens, and player 1 score is now updating too on both screens. So our mission was a success. I just want to quickly talk about how you could make this better. But this is more of a UI mission rather than a replication mission. So here I've done it so you're updating the player and you're doing it by ID. And the ID here, all it is doing is, if you're player 1, then update the player 1 score, and if you're player 2, update the player 2 score. Now, in theory, you probably, if we talk about the Call of Duty game scenario, there's going to be roughly 16 players, depending on the game mode. So you could do this solution with a switch on int, or you could do some sort of clever solution and do it by potential number of rows in a uniform grid, or however you want to do it. But you would do it so that every time a player joins, maybe, or you can do it by, yeah, you probably do it by every time a player joins, add a row to the scoreboard widget, and that row has an associated ID. So every time that you update player score, you check the ID, and then you update the correct row on the scoreboard based on the ID. It's better to work in IDs rather than player controllers or pawns, because IDs are just an int rather than a pointer to a reference in memory, which could always go invalid, or, you know, it's just in general an ID is much cheaper to keep around than a pointer. I hope this was helpful. I'm going to leave the game project down in the description if you want to check it out. So I'm going to put it on GitHub so you can download the project and mess around with it yourself. All this code in here I did today, and it was just a quick little mini game. It's kind of fun, actually. I wonder how it'd be if you were playing it with your mate. And you could easily extend this game mode to be more complete by giving it a timer per round, and you could even add a scoreboard when you press tab and have loads of players, and you could have the scoreboard show at the end of a round and then repeat the round, or have loads of other mini games. The possibilities are really endless. So give this video a like if it helped you out, and make sure to subscribe for more content like this. Adios.